Hi there, this is Grumpy Opinions. Let's get on with the show. Hey folks, another week and another episode of Pluribus. What's Pluribus, you ask? Pluribus is the Apple TV sci-fi show about Carol, who's one of only a handful of survivors of an alien hive mind takeover who want to turn the whole world into a giant, super happy place. And Carol? Well, she's not really happy about that. Episode 4, Please Carol, starts where we left off last time, with Carol leaving the hospital and heading home, helping herself to a police car on the way and finding an awful lot of thems fixing up the grenade damage outside her house. Apparently her house is wooden, so, well, that's me telt then. And she ends up inviting one of them in and starts quizzing him all about her books and stuff, and he's like, yeah, your books are absolutely amazing, we love them. We love them as much as we love Shakespeare. And she thinks that's kind of weird, so she asks a whole bunch of other questions, including, what did Helen think of my unpublished book? And it turns out that even though the thems don't really want to answer this question, they finally do. And Helen thought that the book was kinda meh. So Carol works out from this a few things about her alien overlords, including that they can't lie. So back to the hospital she goes to try and get a bit of information out of Zosia, and when she straight up asks her if there's a way to reverse the joining, she refuses to answer, which is an answer in itself. So Carol sneaks off and nicks some anesthetics, some medical books, syringes, and then she goes home to test a little bit of dosage on herself. And having worked out the right amount, she nips back, takes Zosia out for some fresh air, and sneaks some anaesthetic straight into her drip when she isn't looking. And outside, drugged up Zosia starts to be a bit wobbly, and it looks like she's about to break and answer the question when a whole load of thems come up and surround them chanting, "Please Carol," and crying, until Zosia suddenly ups and collapses of a cardiac arrest. And as Carol lets them resuscitate her, she stands around, looking out at the damage that she's wrought. Meanwhile, in Paraguay, a survivor that we've never seen before is hanging out in his lockup yard, testing radio channels methodically, looking for other survivals, and eating dog food and other things that he's found in the lockups rather than taking anything that the thems will provide. And that's when he gets the call from Carol, the one that she made last week in the previous episode. And suddenly, he knows there's someone else like him alive somewhere in the world, and her name is Carol something. So what did I think? Well, let's mix this up a bit, and I'll get my negative thoughts out the way first. So, this has the same problems as the previous episode, which is basically, this episode is only really 3 short scenes or 3 story beats stretched out to a full episode. Although in this case, it was a 45-minute episode rather than an hour. But still, it's a couple of ideas that have been tediously dragged out far, far longer than they needed to be, just to fill the space, and I think we kind of need to accept that that's just the house style for this show, and it's a style that I don't love. But that said, we spent so much time watching Carol do things that didn't need to be shown in their full extent, like in the case of the anesthesia scene. Now that also could have been a little more understandable, since it wasn't immediately apparent that she'd clearly taken multiple different doses of anesthesia, which is what I presume she was doing, otherwise it doesn't actually make any sense, showing that it needs a certain amount, or it needs a long time for it to kick in. And considering she goes straight to Zosia and then zaps her and then almost immediately starts asking her questions, I presume that it must have been that she worked out the dosage, or that this has taken place over several days. None of which is immediately apparent in the way that it's filmed, which could have been better. Also, the whole Storage Wars guy segment that made up the opening 12 minutes of the show was a slow drag. Again, I appreciate the show is actually telling us a lot of information with no dialogue, and it's giving you huge amounts of visual info. But honestly, I feel like whenever this guy finally gets to meet Carol face to face, he's just going to tell her who he is and explain a lot of the stuff we're seeing here anyway, so it's going to be doubled up information. Other than that, what actually happened this week? I mean, this is a severe lack of plot beyond the notable exception that Carol actually started trying to do something. She started her investigation into how to reverse the joining. And, you know, the whole word board stuff, where it felt like she was laying out facts, essentially for anybody in the audience who hasn't been following the show. Which, if you haven't been following the very small amount of information that this show has been giving you, then God help you, because this is not complicated stuff. But it shows that there is an issue in the show that Carol has no one to talk to, which there are ways around that. Like, we could have had Carol recording herself a la The Martian or something. You know, that might have actually helped. I mean, Martian's a good example, because that's a movie which is substantially, for a lot of the film, just this guy called Mark Watney trapped on Mars by himself, vlogging about how he's surviving. And essentially, he's just talking directly to the audience. Carol, on the other hand, doesn't really have anyone to talk to most of the time, other than the Thems, who is essentially one person with 7 billion different faces. But also, on a side note, Carol's plan is kind of dumb. I mean, it's getting really hard to sympathise with Carol, because she hasn't really had the kind of emotional breakdown that would really endear an audience to her for the horrible things that have happened. And she's not really let her defences drop much. And that itself is characterisation, but again, it makes it a difficult character to really get under the skin of. The show also tends to lean far too heavily into the comically silly, over-the-top stuff in moments where it probably ought to be more normal. And yeah, again, that seems to sort of be the style, but it's a weird style, and again, it's a tonal mishmash that doesn't really work for me. And it's also, this was an episode that we ended with a dead end. Carol's been defeated by her own lack of ability to effect proper change, usually by doing something slightly silly, and that's happened almost every single week. I mean, episode 1, she just doesn't talk to them, but that's fair enough. Episode 2, she pisses everybody off, probably causes the deaths of millions, and then she goes home. Episode 3, she almost blows herself up and hurts Zosia. And now this week, she's almost killed Zosia and made the whole world cry. I mean, she's kind of a crap protagonist. But let's pull things the other way and actually get positive for a minute, because there was all the usual stuff this week that was good as well. Great cinematography, edited together nicely, well acted, with good performances, especially from the random quirky actors that I've never seen before in anything. Like this guy. And Rhea Seaborn is excellent in this. I mean, even down to the little bits of acting where she's just being sad at seeing the video of herself break down when she was on drugs, or the kind of haunted look at her face at the end when, Zosia is potentially dying. Also, I mean, they are trying very hard with the comedy, and I don't know if it's the timing is off, or that the gags aren't quite landing, or if it's just not supposed to be proper chortle laugh out loud funny. Like the thing about the heroin joke with the doctor, or the whole bit about the mayor sweeping her garden, which is a double gag apparently, because that is the real life mayor of Albuquerque doing a little cameo. And I also like that Carol is actively doing something. Literally, she even says that she has agency, and that's true because this is the first week where she really had agency. And that's kind of amusing because she is a writer, so she knows that and she understands character agency, but it's also kind of meta because it's what's happening in the episode. And it's a bit weird that her plan is so half thought through, and that maybe Helen is actually right and her writing is harmless, and maybe Carol isn't actually a great writer. And that makes sense because realistically, what can she do in this situation? What could anybody do in this situation? I mean, this is a bit like the Harry Potter 7 book problem, where after books and books of Harry and co faffing around solving mysteries at Hogwarts and doing magic and shit, they end up out in the real world during a fascist dark wizard takeover. And what do? They kind of hang out in a tent in the woods for most of the book, because in reality, what the hell do a bunch of school kids know about saving the world, even in a magical universe? And similarly, here's Carol trying something, but she's up against, in some ways, her own lack of imagination and ability. Although I would love to know, a little bit more about this world, because what's happened to the internet? I mean, we've not yet seen Carol crack open Wikipedia or, old stuff on YouTube. I mean, it's possible the internet is basically down just like the TV, but that feels like a question that you would expect to have been answered in a show. And again, it's just one of the many, many, many things that I find kind of a bit weird about this whole story situation, because there are so many aspects of just how this reality works that haven't been answered. But yeah, positive things. Yes, we did at least get a little peek into the crack beneath the surface with Carol, but it was interesting that we heard a little bit of this backstory about her being sent to a conversion therapy camp, which is pretty grim stuff, but also does explain in some ways aspects of Carol's personality and her feelings towards the Thems, although it does feel odd, or that this line maybe wasn't written at the point in some of the earlier episodes were done. It just feels like this is kind of a little coming out of nowhere, but that just might be my interpretation of it. Maybe if I go back and rewatch them, I'll feel differently. But I do kind of wish some of this was a bit more woven into the text. Still, it's situationally difficult to get information like that in, due to the nature of the way the story is being told and the lack of flashbacks. There's only so much we've got that we can work from on this show. So where does that leave us now? Well, we're quite a bit through the show now, and it's still dragging a bit, but at least this episode did have some forward momentum, even if it was a bit half-assed and misguided. Also, I will say the bit in Paraguay was well put together, and I'm sure it will be interesting to see how Paraguay guy continues in this story. Anyway, he's going to fit into the show somehow, and it'll be really good to see if he actually does get to chat to Carol. Although, knowing how he's been shown so far, like tipping over food and slamming phones down, there's a good chance he's going to refuse all help and will probably have to drive or walk all the way or take a boat or who knows. So he might not even show up until the finale, if he even shows up at all. I mean, the way that they drag this show out, I can see that happening, and this is the same showrunner that gave us, bald men crawling through a wee town in Mexico for like the first 10-15 minutes of one episode of Breaking Bad. Now, that was weird and made no sense up until the last 2 seconds. Or it looks like that mentality has been taken as the basis for this entire show. And I do feel like this is a show that hasn't quite found its footing yet, and I really think it needs a story hook, and it needs to get one fast, because we're about to hit hump episode, and I still don't know what the plot is of this show. I know what the situation of the show is, and that begs the question, is this just a situation comedy? Could it be that this is fundamentally a show where they're just leisurely exploring one situation, very, very leisurely, because Gilligan is having fun, and the actors and the crew are having a bit of a jolly making it. And I just want more from this show. I mean, you could take a concept like this and unfold it for a billion different ways, and I feel like the show it's not wasting its ideas, but it's kind of rationing them to the point of absurdity. I mean, it reminds me a little bit of the first time I saw Tenet. Now, I like Tenet, it's a solid movie, I reviewed it back in my Movies by Month, and it is a film with problems, but I remember thinking at the time that if it hadn't been a Christopher Nolan film, say if it had been made by Michael Bay, then he'd have just milked the entire reverse time entropy idea for every single cool trick in the book and would have done all kinds of weird wacky things in it all the way through the movie, probably with a plot that was much simpler, much easier to follow, and probably not as good, but it would have been interesting in different ways. And with Pluribus, I feel like this is a concept that you could mine for a heck of a lot of ideas, but this show is a little bit more interested in just plonking the camera down in front of Rhea Seaborn or whatever other actor is and watching them mug about the place from every conceivable angle, which are then all edited in sequence in real time. And that's a choice, and she's a good actress, but I want more from this show, and currently it feels again like this is just some peddling water, just like the last couple of episodes. But that's all I've got for now, so till next time, these have been my grumpy opinions.